Today, I will not talk about EU policies, regulations, or funding instruments. Instead, I want to show you one of the reasons they matter, not on paper, but in real life. Because behind every abstract policy and every boring program line, there is something very human they quietly enable: safety, stability, time, and freedom of choice. Let's be honest. Most people today are not inspired by aggressive, primitive propaganda built on nationality or religion. They are exhausted by it, insulted by it, and increasingly immune to it. That is exactly why we keep pushing back against repression and primitivism, not with more noise, but with better perspectives, with openness instead of fear, dignity instead of manipulation, and real choices instead of imposed identities. Progress does not need shouting. It needs credibility, space, and courage. What you fantasize about, what you feel, and what you actually say out loud are often three very different things. Not because something is wrong with you, but because society has trained you to filter yourself. Today isn't about shocking anyone. It's about clarity. I want to talk about desires many women recognize in themselves but rarely articulate, not because they're extreme or unusual, but because they require trust, safety, and self-permission. This conversation is grounded in psychology, neuroscience, and lived reality, not myths and not what society expects of you. What you fantasize about in private, what you allow yourself to feel, and what you actually say out loud are often three very different things. Not because you're dishonest, but because you've been conditioned to edit yourself. You may be surprised to learn that many of your desires are not rare, not extreme, and not something to be ashamed of. In fact, they're far more common than most women realize. Today, I want to pull back the curtain on what women often desire in their intimate lives, but rarely voice. And I'll ground this conversation in psychology, neuroscience, and research, not myths or stereotypes. Along the way, I'll share some facts that may surprise you and maybe help you see your own desires with more clarity and less judgment. I'm Boscos Avatar, and this conversation is about understanding yourself, not performing for anyone else. Here's what we'll cover. First, 10 desires many women recognize internally but hesitate to articulate. Second, the psychological and neurological reasons these desires exist, from dopamine release to stress regulation. And finally, why creating psychological safety with yourself and with a partner is the foundation for real intimacy. Without safety, desire stays hidden and turns into frustration. That's not a flaw, it's self-protection. Let's begin. 1. Power dynamics and consensual control. One of the most common unspoken desires involves power exchange, often referred to as BDSM in its broadest sense. Research shows that nearly half of women have fantasized about some form of consensual restraint, dominance, or surrender. This is not about pain or humiliation. It's about trust, intentional control, and choice. Interestingly, studies show that people who engage in consensual power dynamics often report lower stress levels and stronger communication skills. Clear boundaries, explicit consent, and aftercare require emotional intelligence. Many women hesitate to voice this desire because they've been taught they should be good, proper, and never sexually assertive, or never openly curious about surrender. But wanting to choose vulnerability is not weakness, it's agency. 2. Being seen, exhibitionism, and visibility. Another common fantasy involves being watched or witnessed. Around 1/3 of women report some level of arousal linked to being seen, not necessarily publicly, but intentionally. This desire is often misunderstood as attention-seeking, when in reality it's about confidence, presence, and ownership of one's body. Psychological research links this kind of desire to self-esteem and personal confidence. Being seen safely reinforces the sense of I exist and I am desired. Many women suppress this fantasy because they've been taught their sexuality should be private, quiet, and invisible. But visibility, when chosen, is empowerment, not shame. 3. Watching rather than owning. Consensual non-exclusivity fantasies. Some women fantasize about scenarios where exclusivity is temporarily suspended, including watching a partner with someone else. This isn't about inadequacy. It often taps into voyeurism, trust, compersion, and curiosity. Research suggests that when such fantasies are discussed openly, even without being acted upon, couples often experience improved communication and deeper trust. Women rarely admit this curiosity because it contradicts social expectations of jealousy and possession. But curiosity does not equal desire to lose connection. Sometimes it reflects emotional security, not lack of attachment. 4. Sensory deprivation and heightened awareness. Many women report increased desire for sensory deprivation, blindfolds, reduced sound, or limited movement, not because they want to disappear, but because removing one sense heightens the others. Neurological studies show this can increase dopamine release, intensifying sensation and focus. The hesitation here is understandable. Sensory deprivation requires deep trust. It involves vulnerability and surrender to presence. If safety is missing, desire shuts down. That's biology, not fear. 5. Messy, tactile, playful sensation. Some desires aren't about intensity, but about play. Wet, messy, tactile experiences activate multiple senses at once. Research on sensory play links it to creativity and pleasure. Many women dismiss this desire as childish or too much, when in reality it reconnects the body to curiosity and spontaneity. Pleasure doesn't always need meaning. Sometimes it needs permission. 6. Role play and imagined identities. Role play is less about pretending and more about exploring different expressions of self, confidence, authority, innocence, or novelty in a safe container. Psychology shows that role play allows people to experiment with identity without real-world consequences. Women often avoid voicing this desire because they fear being misunderstood, but imagination is not deception, it's exploration. 7. Being cared for. Nurturing dynamics. Some women desire dynamics that emphasize care, protection, and being looked after. This is not regression, it's nervous system regulation. Research shows that feeling protected lowers cortisol levels and strengthens emotional bonding. The hesitation comes from fear of sounding needy or misunderstood. But the desire to rest in safety is human, not pathological. 8. Foot-focused curiosity. Foot-related desire is far more common than people admit. Neuroscience shows that sensory regions for feet and genitals are adjacent in the brain, which may explain why stimulation here can be arousing. Curiosity does not require labels. Bodies respond in intelligent, sometimes unexpected ways. 9. Light, impact, and contrast. Light spanking or impact play introduces contrast, pleasure, and intensity together. This releases endorphins, increases blood flow, and heightens sensation. Many women avoid mentioning this because they fear being judged or misunderstood. Wanting contrast is not wanting harm, it's wanting sensation. 10. The deepest desire, being intensely desired. The most common fantasy is not about acts, it's about being desired, deeply, unmistakably, without apology. Research consistently shows that women's strongest sexual fantasy is not dominance or novelty, but feeling irresistible. This is about feeling seen, chosen, and powerful in one's own skin. In reality, women's desires are diverse, common, and far more mainstream than society admits. When you understand that curiosity is normal, that trust amplifies pleasure, and that safety unlocks honesty, something shifts. You don't need to justify your fantasies. You don't need to act on all of them. But you do deserve to understand them without shame. Start by creating a safe zone to talk about it. Then, if and when you choose, explore it. That's where real intimacy begins. When you discover that role-playing and age play create vulnerability and bonding, And when you embrace that being intensely desired is women's number one fantasy, you realize that creating a safe space for her to express these needs is the key to incredible intimacy. Creating a safety zone may start today. Tell her explicitly that you won't judge her fantasies. Ask open-ended questions like, what's something you've thought about trying but haven't talked about? Share one of your own desires first to show vulnerability. Create a judgment-free zone where nothing is off limits to discuss. Start small with something mild, like a blindfold, and build from there. Watch how she opens up when she feels psychologically safe. That's when you know true intimacy is developing. If you believe EU funds are a boring topic, you're right. But someone still has to finance the comfort, safety, free time, and occasional luxury required to calmly explore your fantasies, reflect on psychology, and have 7 uninterrupted minutes of self-awareness. Romance is emotional. Desire is psychological. Intimacy may be personal, but comfort rarely is. EU-funded programs helped more than people like to admit.